Welcome back. This is the 7th video in a series where I record myself while I try to learn Python programming and the tools that support that with the goal of eventually creating a useful web app. In my previous video, I discussed virtual environments, but I didn't start one or use one. In this video, I'm going to spend most of my time writing Python code. That code is going to use the PyYAML Python package, and I want to install that package in a virtual environment so I don't start adding random packages to my system Python. To use a virtual environment, we first need to activate it. To activate the virtual environment, I'm going to go to my project directory. And in the project directory, I can see that I've already created a virtual environment and named it env. To activate the virtual environment on a Linux system, I use the source command to pull in configurations from the activate script stored in the bin directory in the environment directory. This changes environment variables in my shell and makes sure that when I'm using Python in this terminal window, it's using the version of Python that's been copied into the virtual environment, and it's only using the packages that are installed in this virtual environment. To activate the virtual environment, I run the command source env bin activate. My Linux command prompt has changed to show me that I am in an active virtual environment. If for some reason I wanted to switch to another virtual environment, for example, I wanted to switch to another project and then use that project's virtual environment, I should first deactivate this virtual environment, and that's done with the deactivate command. Now I can switch to another environment. For example, if I had another project called test, I would switch to that, and then I would activate the virtual environment that's part of that project. I'm still in the user mapper project, so I'm going to reactivate the virtual environment and start programming. As always, before I get started, I'll check the Git status of my project. There's nothing to commit, but I can see that I'm already ahead of the remote repository because in my last video, I already did one commit to the local repository. That's not an issue right now. I'm just working locally. I see that I'm in the right branch. I'm in the add config file branch. And a bit more data about the branches. Let's see what's been done recently. I can see the last thing I did was create an example config.yaml file. I just want to have a quick look at that config.yaml file. Now, I created this pretty much all from scratch, and I don't even know if it's valid YAML. I need to check this before I invest much time in writing code that reads this file. Since yesterday, I found a couple of really good websites about YAML. The first website is the YAML tutorial from the rollout.io blog. This was really detailed and had a lot of great information about YAML in general. So I really encourage you to read this before you proceed much further. Another great tool is the YAML lint project. This is a web app that's probably not too different from the kind of web app that I want to create. It will let you input text into this field, and then it will tell you if it's valid YAML. So let's do that with our file here. It's valid YAML. First try, I wrote a valid YAML file. That's excellent. So this is a great tool if you're trying to create a YAML file. And the YAML tutorial here is so far the best documentation I've found about how to write YAML. The next thing I need to do is learn about the PyYAML module. A lot of the things you need to learn when you're working with Python is not the syntax of the language, it's how you use the features that are available to you in the standard library and how to use other packages that you might install. A lot of the value of Python comes from using work that other people have already done for you. I'm going to use the PyYAML package, so I need to learn about it. I'll read the PyYAML documentation. It shows me how to install it. I can install it using pip install PyYAML. I'm in my virtual environment. So when I install this, it's only going to get installed in the user mapper's virtual environment named env. Now I know this is a weird error, but if I read through it, it looks like it's related mostly to trying to install this package from source code, but it still says it successfully installed PyYAML, so I'm going to ignore the error. After reading through the documentation, I'll experiment a little bit with the PyYAML module. I'll open up the Python interactive prompt. Oops, I meant to type import instead of load. I'll import the YAML module. Then I'll look at the documentation for how to use it. Now I remember there was a section on loading YAML. Loading YAML, here's the instructions. And a little bit further down here it shows how to get the output of YAML. So you would just create a file handler and then use that as an input into the YAML load command. And that should give you some Python objects that have been translated from the YAML file. So let's see what that looks like. I'll call my file handler stream because that's what the documentation calls it. And the file name was config.yaml. And we'll open it in read mode. Use the open command instead of the file. There is a Python object created by the YAML module. And it's giving me a warning here. I need to specify the loader, and the default loader is unsafe. As I recall from the documentation, you need to specify safe loader so that somebody can't put actual executable code in the YAML file and have a configuration file that messes up your computer. Another way to do that is to use the safe load method that's part of the YAML module. For example, I could run yaml.safeload, and this is in the documentation. I'm having trouble reading from stream, and the reason for that is I forgot that after I run YAML load, it closes the file. So I need to open the file again before I can read from it. So this time I've used the safe load option, and this is what I'll use in my program. So enough experimentation, I can see what this dictionary is going to look like after it has been interpreted by the YAML module. And my program is going to read through this dictionary, pull out the relevant pieces of information, and use that to drive the logic that's going to build a larger data structure that contains all the information that will eventually be translated into the usermapping.xml file. Since I'm going to be working with the config.yaml file, I'll make a copy of it that will serve as an example file as part of this project package. And for debugging purposes, I'll create a quick little script that will print out a dictionary that shows how the YAML file is being interpreted into Python. Now that I have a configuration file and a test program that prints it out, I think this is a good place to commit this to the Git history. And just to back this up to the remote, I'll just push this up there. I think all I need to do is git push. Now let's get started on the mapperdata.py file. The mapperdata.py module prints out the students directory and the IP directory, so I can get a good look at how this is structured. I think that to make this a little bit easier to read, I'm going to reduce it down to one student and one device. You can see how unintuitive and difficult it was to modify that file, which is why I want to change the logic in this file away from hard coding the data to just reading the data in from a config file. First, I'll delete all the code in this file because I'm not going to use any of it anymore. Then I'm going to look at the output of the original mapperdata.py file, and this is the format that my new code needs to generate, and I can have a look at the data that I need to read from the configuration file by running that test program I wrote earlier. This is the configuration file as it will appear to the mapperdata.py file after it reads it in using the PyYAML module. So I see I'll have a dictionary with student and trainer names and then nested dictionaries that describes the devices. So I have to start somewhere. What will I start with? I'll start with the logic that's going to randomly generate passwords. That's one thing I didn't have in the original mapperdata.py. Everything was hard-coded, so I couldn't randomly generate anything. So I'm going to randomly generate some passwords. I don't know how to do that in Python, so I'll just search for the instructions on how to do that. Stack Overflow is usually a good source for information like this. This is a really good explanation here. So I read through this entire article, and it looks like the right thing to do will be to use the Python secrets module, which is a little bit more secure than using the random module. Of course, read the documentation for the Python secrets module. And I can see here, it's all about generating random numbers. And there's some sample code for using it. All right, so we'll just write a function using this code here. I need to import the YAML module, the secrets module, and the string module. Then I'll create a function called getUserPasswords. And for the parameters, I'll give it the password value that I get from the configuration file for each user type. And I'll give it an optional parameter for the length of the password. And I'll just use that in my code later on. It's not in the configuration file. So if the password value in that configuration file was random, then generate a random password. And this ASCII letters method is part of the string module we imported. Same thing with the digits method. And this part here is what's known as a list comprehension. This is another good reason to read a good book on Python before you get started. Just browse through one like I did. That way when you see something like this, you know what it is and you're not surprised. This code could have also easily been done with a for loop. I'm just using the sample code. And if it was anything other than random, some password that you want everybody to have, just use what was in the configuration file. And then the value of this function, if it's called, is the password that it generates. So I'm going to return password. Now I need to write some code so that I can interpret this or test this. First, I need to read the configuration file. And I really should be consistent with my use of quotes. Where is the password in there? It's in the users directory. It's in users under, I'm just going to pick one of them, under trainers. Let's see if that runs. Of course, I've got an error. I see I screwed up my import statement. That was just because I edited a string that was already there. I keep running into new errors. Finally, it worked. I can see that that module has read the word random, and when it got the word random, it generated a random password. I should see a different password every time I run this. And I should probably change this test code so that it goes through every user that's in the file. I'll just have another look at what that file looks like. Since this is a nested dictionary, I need to do a nested loop. Let's see if that works. I'm going to go through this dictionary. For every dictionary under users, I'm going to look for, after that, for every dictionary, every other dictionary, and then anything that's got the value password, I'm going to try to print something out. I'm trying to figure out why I'm getting this error. It has something to do with the key I'm using. I think I'll try to debug this by adding a print statement in the loop and see what value is showing up for x. I see the word trainers is there, so that's one of the keys. I think what's happening here is I am iterating through the key and not the value that the key points to, which is the dictionary. Yeah, because x is just a string. So what I need to do, I'll get rid of this debug statement. And then I need to make sure that I'm iterating through the dictionary configuration users with the key x. So I'll just copy that. Key x and then the key password. And again, I think I'm iterating through the wrong object here. So for y in configuration users x password, right, that's just going to give me the string, which is a password, and I'm iterating through it. So I only need configuration users x, and then I need to print configuration users x password. So I'll iterate through configuration users x, and configuration users x points to a dictionary of values associated with one of the user types. And then configuration users x password points to the password in one of those user types, the password value in one of those user types. Since this will make a fairly long line, I'm going to just put it in its own variable and then print the variable and then use that variable as the parameter for my getUserPasswords function call. I'm not sure exactly if that's what I want. I think I'm going to add in a tag to tell me which class of user is associated with which password. We'll see what result I get. Yeah, this is odd. I should have only 2 under trainers and 10 under students. Why is that happening? I'll have a look at the config file again. Again, I see what's happening here. I'm iterating through a dictionary. When I say for Y in configuration users X, I'm iterating through all the values for the trainer's user type. And there are 4 key value pairs in there. And that's why it iterates 4 times, regardless of how many users are under trainers and how many users are under students. So I need to look for the quantity and use the quantity as a value to iterate through. I have another error here. I need to iterate through a range. I need to use that integer as the parameter to a range function, and then that will give me a range of 0 to x to iterate through. And then I can see here I have 10 students, I have 2 trainers. I can see that the result is exactly what I'm expecting. And if I change the keyword from random to some specific value, I should see that the students, for example, in this case, all get the same password now instead of random passwords. The mapperdata.py script with the random password generation logic is working now, and I can proceed to the next step, writing more functions and testing them. Before I do that, I will commit my current changes to the Git repository. That's odd. I don't remember modifying config.yaml. I'm going to check my log and see what I did. That's not helpful, so I'll run the git diff command, which will compare the version in my working tree with what was previously committed. Okay, I've got some data there. Oh, I see. I remember I changed the password just as an example. I don't need to commit that. That's not something I need to change. So I'm only going to commit the mapperdata.py file. And I'll just send this up to the remote repository for safety. And I want to clean up the config.yaml file. I don't want to check in those changes, so I'm going to restore back to the previous commit. I'm not exactly sure if this command will work, so I'll run it with the dry run option, which will tell me what it will do without actually making the changes. I guess there is no dry run option for this. There, I've cleaned that up, and if I go back to the config.yaml file, I should get that warning that it's been changed on disk, and if I reload, I should see that that password has changed back to random, which was what it was before I changed it. This is one of the useful features of Git. If there's something you don't want to check into its history, you can just delete it from its history, and the file will go back to the way it was the last time you committed it. I've run out of time tonight, so I can't work on the other functions that need to be added to the mapperdata.py file, but I've learned a lot already. I learned how to use the PyYAML package in Python. I installed it. I'm working in a virtual environment. I got more practice working with iterators like dictionaries and lists in Python, and also with Git. I'll get back to coding tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.